Hi, if you don't know me, my name's John Smiles, and I'm here to talk to you about the little bunker you've got visible on your screen. There's more to it than that, obviously, it goes underground, which is Wartling. I'm not qualified in any way to talk to you about this. I'm not an expert by any means, but I've been looking after this site with the help of a wonderful team of volunteers and the cooperation of a heritage interested farmer who owns the site now for about 16 years, which is longer than the RAF looked after the site. So the other people that help us out are Sub Brit, and part of the reason why I'm doing this, I've been a member for a very long time, and Sub Brit have helped us out several times with bigger projects because the bunker's very broken and has required a lot of input. And my talk today will be about an hour, and I'll tell you the story of the rotor program to some degree. I'll tell you about this radar station, Wartling, and how it changed over the years, and what we've done to conserve the structure over the last 16 years. So a lot of you will know that it was a basket case a long time ago, and at a time where we thought, well, we wouldn't really be able to do anything with it, but we've done a great deal with it over the years. So hope to be able to show you some of that work. There's a Q&A at the end, so I'll hang around and answer questions if anyone has any. And if this is like any of these other events that I've done, that will undoubtedly be the case. But chip in with questions. Chip in with questions if you have them, and otherwise, please try to keep the chat to a minimum between yourselves. So first thing on this first slide, I'm going to kill my camera now because there's nothing really to gain from looking at me. And then I can go full screen with the slides. There you go. As you can tell, I'm not very comfortable with the technology yet, but we're getting there. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a little question. Nicely spotted, Roy. That is a WB400 behind me. There's also the clock from a MiG-21 up there. So I'm going to start with a sort of quiz, which is just to set some context for the rotor program. Who can tell me what that is? I'm sure there are enough well, I've seen Mick Block is on here and he's constantly bothering aeroplanes, so I would imagine somebody can get that. Can you all see it? Does anyone know what it is? B29, precisely. Yeah, they're all starting to come in. There's a little bit of a lag between it when I say things and when they come through to you. But yes, that's a B29. And now for the more eagle-eyed among you, what's this? It's a very similar plane, you'll notice. No, we've still got answers coming in for the first image. It's not a B29. Okay, so that is a Tupolev Tu-4 Bull. It was first flown in May of 1947, and it's a Soviet plane, as Tupolev Design Bureau gives that away. The USA repeatedly denied Lend-Lease requests for the Stratofortress during World War II. And at the end of the war for Russia, which due to their non-aggression pact with the Japanese was VE Day, a couple of people have come through and said, yes, it's Tu-4, very good, Haley. The neutrality pact meant that the Russian war was over on VE Day and they became neutral territory. And under the usual terms of engagement as a neutral territory, they were obliged to impound any weapons of war which fell into their hands. And while the Americans were doing long-range bombing missions, they flew over parts of Russia And during the course of the remainder of the war, up until its conclusion with the two big bangs, they bailed or crashed 4 aircraft. Now, Stalin was delighted by this, and he was quite happy to comply with the convention, despite the very strong protests of the American government, who wanted their planes back. But he said, no, thank you very much, I'll keep them until the end of the war. But what he did, he took them to the Tupolev Design Bureau, and he said, re-engineer this, and then stop the development of your own heavy bomber, because the Russians were always quite poor on bombers. So they managed to do this in 2 years, which is an amazing turnaround. And despite the fact that they couldn't get a lot of the advanced materials the Americans had and so on, they managed to get a in-spec bomber, similar speed and range. I think it does 3,400 miles, something like that, and reaches 350 miles an hour. And their copy was only 1% heavier than the American original. So that gave the Russians the ability to project power into Europe, deep into Europe, and fast. So there's one more leg to the quiz. Who's this? After this, I'll stop asking questions and I'll just talk to you. But I didn't know that about the camera, Ian. Anyone recognise who this chap is? Singly important in the development of the early Cold War. He and about 15 others. Sorry, I forgot to change the slide. That's an idiot thing to do. Right, it should be much easier now you can see an image. Invisible man indeed. But he's going to be there in a moment, I promise you. Fuchs, indeed, Mark, and nice to see you are here. Yeah, Klaus Fuchs. So after the Rosenbergs, probably the best known atomic spy, one of at least 15 people that supercharged the Soviet quest for their own atom bomb. Russia at this point had very little nuclear infrastructure, and they had no domestic uranium mines. They had a tiny scientific team by comparison with the Allied effort. I think it was something like 50 scientists, something like that. But they made up that shortfall with the help of communist sympathizers in Canada, in the US, and in the UK. And Fuchs was involved in the Manhattan Project. He worked on the gas centrifuges at Reedermoy, another site beloved of Sub Brit readers or members, for tube alloys, which was our attempt to enrich uranium. And he was right inside, and he handed over basically a great deal of the right answers to the questions which the Russians were grappling with. So in just 4 years after Hiroshima detonated, on the 29th of August 1949, the world reeled when the Soviets detonated their first Lightning. That was the name for their bomb. The Americans called it Joe 1 at Semipalatinsk, and it was a 20 kiloton copy of the Fat Man implosion bomb that destroyed Nagasaki. 4 years later, in '53, they created their first fusion weapon, which wasn't a true hydrogen bomb, but it got some fusion going by layering it in. And then in November '55, they detonated their first true H-bomb in the megaton range. And that sets the scene for the panic buying of ROTOR, the ROTOR program, which is here. So that threat was perceived very keenly in Whitehall and in America. And the Cherry Report in 1949 looked at the new threats and the old radars and decided that they probably weren't up to the job. So they came up with the ROTOR plan, which was to be completed in phases, was to refurbish some of the wartime. Very good. I've forgotten to click the thing again. Sorry. was restoring some of the existing sites to give us some coverage and move the accommodation underground, which created some of the best bunkers which we have in the UK. There's a total of 39 bunkers at existing sites. I don't think I have a little pointer here on this, but Wartling, our one of interest, is near Eastbourne, down in the southeast corner, and you can see it's between Fairlight and Beachy Head. So this was rotor plan: get underground, upgrade the radars, and use ground control, intercept, and central reporting. There is some talk that rotor stands for the restoration of the old radar, and that's subject of some conversation in the community just at the moment. If anyone does know of a decent, credible source for that phrasing, restoration of the old radars, in an Air Ministry file or anything, do let me know, because we're having a bit of a conversation about it at the moment. On the east and south coast, the bunkers were underground and heavily hardened. Further west, they were semi-sunken bunkers or even soft R8 sites like RAF Cheney's, which is now gone. You can see that just to the west of London, and that was basically a soft structure. This lot obviously cost an awful lot of money, but the perceived risk was so great that even in the war-torn economy of the day, they pressed ahead with the plan and began building. In the late 50s, by which time rotor had been declared functionally obsolete pretty much, the programme and its associated projects had consumed at least 240 million, which inflates to about 6.3 billion in 2020 prices, and that for a few short years of operation. So what is Wartling? It's fair to say there's been a presence of radar at around Pevensey Bay since the very beginning. The lie of the land makes it an obvious place, and it was the home to one of the earliest train home stations, RAF Pevensey, in 1939. And the remnants behind, the remnants down on the marsh below Wartling, the mast bases are still there, although that was cleared after an auction in the 50s. It was one of the original 20 Air Ministry experimental stations, and throughout World War II, this and RAF Wartling, the first RAF Wartling, which was the Ground Control Intercept Site, GCI, was put in over the road in a happydrome, which is a surface bunker or blockhouse, really. And it helped to protect the UK from the Luftwaffe, tracking, among other things, 380 V1 doodlebugs, which were subsequently destroyed by aircraft or the gun belts, which were laid out on the North Downs. It was on Pevensey, was on care and maintenance by December 45, but Wartling continued operation from an enlarged happydrome until by 47 it was one of the last remaining GCIs in southern England. So GCI, ground control intercept, in other words, getting fighters to the baddies. Super hardened on the caption, questions just come in. I'll come on to that. Tom. And to Hilary Shaw's question, it is the standard MOD bungalow design. They're all similar unless there's local variations which are insisted on by the planners using local stone, for instance, or just a little variation. So at the outset of the rotor plan, the original happydrome was maintained and extended, and its radar was uprated to create a chain home readiness station to provide some cover while the new bunker was built. And the new bunker was put up on the hill, much higher on the hill, both for elevation, for improved seeing or range for the radars, but also to get out of the water. Pevensey levels are an internationally important wetland. We actually had to get several permissions when we pumped the bumper out in 2004 because it's an SSSI. It's something to do with breeding birds. It's got some designation for that, and something else that had 3 separate tickets that had to be ticked off, which we of course did to get the water out of it. And in fact, they were happy to have the water. On completion of the new protected accommodation in March 55, the operations moved underground into a 2-level R3 bunker. And that's the second largest of all the types built under ROTOR. In fact, if I go back a moment to the ROTOR plan, I'm not sure if you can see this where it's not zoomed in enough. It's quite small on my screen, but if you can, you see there are 4 basic types. There's the SOC, which is Centre Operations Control, and they're the ones that would talk to the fighters in the first iteration of ROTOR plan. SOC, so you can see there at Shipton, Barnton Quarry, the one down at Kelvedon Hatch, etc. And then there's the CEWs, the Centimetric Early Warnings, which were post-war additions. CHEL, the Chain Home Extra Low, which is Chain Home was, you could get around it quite easily by flying underneath it, but the Germans thankfully never worked that out very well. Chain Home Low was put in to introduce that, to improve that, and that still had a big gap, so they put in Chain Home Extra Low as a final move in the war, and that was integrated into ROTOR. And then there's the GCIs, the Ground Control Intercepts, which are large 2-story bunkers. I'll talk about structure and the nature of the hardening on the next slide. Right. Did I cover that? Yeah, you see there's room for 120 people approximately downstairs. Okay, so construction started over the winter of 1951-52, and they excavated a very large hole with a dragline shovel. The hole had to be large enough to accommodate the structure, which is about 200 foot long. I've done it all in modern on the slide, but 200 foot long, 120 wide, and about 100 foot deep on 2 levels. Surprisingly, these things aren't very deep. You can see on that plan, if you look very closely, there are some depths, and you can see the contour lines of the surface. So we're on the surface of the hill or very close to it, but the bunker's actually so close to the surface that in the summertime we sometimes can see its outline in the field above, and we know exactly how deep it is because we've dug down to it, which I'll come on to later. The contractors were Trollope and Coles, who'd worked on other MOD sites, although the adjacent sites were all done by different people, Sir Robert McAlpine and I can't remember the other one, but they spread this out because it was an enormous effort of construction for the day. These things are very, very labour intensive to make by the standards of the day. These guys are not using concrete pumps and modern technology. They're probably hand bending the steels on site and chugging things in by the lorry load and doing wet pours and keeping them wet all the time. So very, very difficult to build at the time. There were lorries taking spoil off site pretty much constantly. Most of it was dumped at the, what's that place called? Crumbles in Eastbourne, where pebble extraction had previously been in industry. So they used it to fill in the holes down there. There are some spurious stories about it being built in secret and the spoil being taken off site in bread vans, which must have been enormous bread vans and probably noticeable for the amount of chalk dust that was all over them. But I think that's entirely nonsense. And as I put on the slide there, you can see it was marked on Soviet military maps from the very earliest stages of its construction as how's our Cyrillic? What's that? That's Radarnil bunker. Yeah, and took 4 years to build and wire up. The construction was confounded a little bit by water ingress. So following completion of the structure, Bill, that's not a helpful comment, and I don't care. So following completion of the structure, fit out began with ladies. We did, of course, test it, but we used a different PC. Anyway, fit out began with ladies from the Marconi Wireless Telegraphy Company, which was part of English Electric at the time, to create the complex wiring looms. These things are fantastically complicated because it's all analog point-to-point wiring. The bunker these days, for anyone who's visited will know, is full of cable trays. In fact, the entire thing is basically it's a cable management system that allows people to work near the cables and stuff to cool it down. Apart from that, it's very simple. Those of us who studied these bunkers are a little bit confused by some design features which seem to make them blast friendly rather than resistant, but we can talk about those perhaps in the questions. It was completed in, well, 28th of February 1955, 2 years behind schedule. And when I say it was bedecked by problems with water, during work last year, we found what we thought was a new leak. I think Neil found it, and there's near the cable shaft, which is the source of all of our water problems. There is a patch which is clearly original, and we chipped away at it because we thought it was a leak, but actually we left it alone soon enough because we worked out it was actually keeping water out. During the original construction, several cracks emerged in the structure, which of course very, very difficult to fix when you've got 10-foot thick walls. So what they did was they bitumen patched them on the inside and then put layers of shotcrete over the top. But we found that, I'm sure there were others. When it was handed over to the RAF signals sections, they did 4 weeks of running up before it became fully operational on the 28th of March. And that's when Wartling moved underground. 120 personnel working underground on a normal watch in its first rotor incarnation. We've heard, and it's in the literature, that women outnumbered men quite significantly, perhaps 2 to 1. But that doesn't line up with the testimony we've got from people who worked in them. Anyone's got any different opinions? I'd be quite interested to hear them. But one of our mainstays of the volunteer team, Howard, who I think is listening in right now, his mum and dad both worked at Wartling. I think they met there, in fact. If I recall correctly, his mum's recall is that it was roughly 50-50 or thereabouts, which would be unusual for an RAF site in the 50s, I suppose. But there you go. That's what we heard. So if anyone knows anything, let me know. This is always a conversation. So this is the schematic, which you're probably all deeply familiar with from the Sub Brit website. They're massively constructed. It's certainly strong, but it's not designed to withstand a direct hit from a nuclear weapon. Nothing can this close to the surface. A direct hit with a contemporary H-bomb would convert this structure into fallout dust pretty quickly, because the crater from a ground burst weapon would consume it entirely. It was, however, designed to withstand pattern bombing from 2,200-pound high explosive bombs dropped from 35,000 feet. I have seen sources cite, I'll come on to that in a moment, your question, Tim. Some sources have cited resistance to a near miss from a standard Soviet 20 kiloton A-bomb, but I don't know the source of that. I've never seen it in anything official, but I've seen references to that. And it was built on the hill. Yeah. The original Happydrome was maintained and extended, and its radar was updated to create chain home readiness station to provide cover while this was built. What have I got about the construction? No. Yeah, so the walls, as you can see there, they're slightly thinner on the outside, on the entrance corridors, than they are in the main body of the bunker. So once you get into the dirty section beyond the plant, the first plant room, once you go down from the emergency exit. Charles, I've left my picture on because it doesn't really add much, and this makes your slide slightly bigger. So There we go. So slightly thinner, and that causes some problems with differential settling, even though there's an awful lot of foundations beneath the principal slab. It's not piled, as far as I know. Certainly not the sort of thing we would do to pile it these days. And they move at different rates, which does give us some problems with cracking. We have cracks, which I think it's this end. No, that's the cable shaft end. So we're looking at the cable shaft entrance end of the bunker here, and we come in at the other end, but we get cracks right down the walls there. We have got one crack in the main structure as well, but that's taken a very long time to come in, and has actually sealed itself up, possibly with calcite lifted from the concrete itself over the years. So there you go. The outer structure, it's 10 feet of reinforced concrete. It's got tungsten steel bars, Nigel, every 6 inches in all dimensions throughout. We've cut out sections of this through the years, and it is massively strong concrete. I don't know, I've never seen any specifications in terms of kilonewtons, but it's very, very strong, hard concrete as well. We're lucky that one of our volunteers, Nigel, runs a technical concrete cutting business, so that takes care of any holes we have to make, but you would struggle with hand tools, put it like that. I think there were a couple of, Tim mentioned that you might be able to work out the provision for different sexes by the provision for toilets. We'll have a look at that. It's a pretty good idea. I've never counted it up reasonably. And Mr. G has just made a pretty good point on the hardening. Targeting, accurate targeting was not a forte of airdrop bombs. I mean, today where you've got CEPs of meters, sorry, that's circular error probable for missiles. Yeah, you can put it through the letterbox if you want, but you couldn't then. Right, so I think I'll move on at that point. And this was the first radar, which the first GCI radar, which was installed at Wartling. This is the same sort of thing that we've operated down on the level at the old Happydrome, and at the time, it was a remarkable piece of work compared to the radar that they had in the war. You can go full page on the slides and lose the chat window if you want to, David. So, as it says there, it's a 1942 Type 7 GCI scanning search radar with a 90 nautical mile range and height finding in the same head, which would have been a separate activity beforehand. Oh, welcome, Roger. Nice to hear that you served at Wart. Used throughout the life of Wartling with upgrades. It was the earliest, and it was kept on in later years at a remote outstation half a mile away down on the level, which is now nothing more than a concrete plinth with 2 holes in it that are full to the surface with water. The one at Wartling actually burnt down in the early 60s and was replaced and upgraded. But they kept them as a backup in case the main radar went down. But also to provide some redundancy in different frequency areas in case they were jammed. So the Type 7 worked on a different frequency range, so it would allow you to continue to detect even if someone was jamming in a different area of the radio spectrum. Richard, if you're referring to the Type 7, I think that's probably unlikely. I don't know. It could be a similar looking type, but I think they were pulled out of use long before that, in the 80s at the latest. Right. So if I go on, so this is an original Type 14 radar console. I've got a bunch of pictures here. They're not Wartling, I don't think. Some are certainly from the only official photo shoot, which was done inside a rotor, which was done at RAF Sopley in Hampshire. sometime in the early 60s or the late 50s, either, let's say. So you can see that each person is sat in front of a console, and they're doing quite a lot of plotting in the background. This is the very manual version. Rotor Mark 1 is not hugely different from wartime filtering and reporting. Just a little point to note, notice the notice board on the back wall. You'll see that later. I think there's an image of it. We've got very few artifacts which are identifiable left in the bunker, but that's one of them, which we were quite pleased to find when we emptied it. So under the first incarnation of Rotor, plotters at radar stations would track enemy aircraft and report to one of 5 sector operation controls, which would then scramble and instruct the interceptor radar, interceptor aircraft. On 4 sites, Barnton Quarry in Scotland, which our friend Grant is busy trying to rise from the flames of its 1980s incineration at the hands of vandals, and that project is ongoing at the moment. Shipton in Yorkshire, Bulborough in East Anglia, which is a private site very rarely accessed by urbexers, and Kelvedon Hatch, which we know is Mike Parish's museum just north of London. In fact, Robin's on the call, and he did a lot of work to set that up and probably still maintains it. But they're the purpose-built R4 bunkers, similar to the radar sites like this one, but with an extra story on the top. There was a Southern Sector SOC at Box in Wiltshire, which was reused an existing World War II site in Tunnel Quarry next to the Caution Computer Centre. And one was started at Langley Lane in Preston, but it was never fitted out. So under Rotor 1, the issue... Oh, hi, Ed. Under Rotor 1, you would detect at the GCIs and the other centres, each of which was looking for its own sort of thing, early warning, target identification, and homing in on the quarry. And then the response, the fighter response, would be coordinated through the SOCs, which is something we'll be looking at in just a minute, how that changed. This is a close-up with similar sort of gear. I think it's the same machine, actually, the same head. There's some of these at Neatishead, I believe, in the Radar Museum. So this is the position in the number 1 intercept cabin in 54. This may be Wartling, and if you notice over the top of the console, you can see down into the ops room. So that's quite a big drop. It's a very large room. It's about, I'd say, 30 to 40 feet high. I don't know exactly, and you can just see the corner of the tote and the staircase, which we'll see in some of my photographs later on. This unit they're looking at is a Marconi plan position indicator. And if I go on to my next one. And here is a image of the ops room from the other side. So the image we were just looking at down into, that would be the top left window just underneath those very large and imposing light fittings, which we still have, although not quite in that position. On the upper story, there's an intercept cabin on the left and right. There's an intercept cabin also on the I think it's bottom. Yeah, the 2 glazed ones at the bottom. The bit in the middle at the top is called I/O, which I assume is input output, like managing the comms, but I don't actually know. And the bit at the bottom is called on the drawings projector, which we were all scratching our heads over. Well, not very hard, but we're having some conversations about it. Gerald, yeah, I think they're publicity programmed. We don't know of any that have been that people have taken their own. It would have been quite a secure site, but there you are. There are a couple of things to note on. Oh, sorry, I was talking about projector. We were having a conversation within the community about why it would be called projector, and Grant Moore found, he of Barnton Quarry, found a reference in an Air Ministry file saying that this was sort of future-proofing. There's no projector equipment there, but it was left as a way of potentially automating the tote board at some point in the future with technologies unknown. So that's why that one's called projector. There's a couple of things to note in this image which I would be are worth pointing out. Firstly, they're using a World War II style time clock with the little coloured arrows, so that you use markers on the boards which correspond to the colour on the clock. It seems they were still using that at this time. And one that makes us puzzle a little bit, if you look very closely, it's not very clear in the image, but it could be intelligence office, Haley. Yes, I don't know. I've got no further expansion. I should have a look at different drawings. If anyone knows definitively, please let me know. If you look closely on the back wall, there is a series of sockets. So there's one set that run about a foot above the lower cabins and one a foot below the upper cabins. Oh, Chief Controller and Ops B. That's interesting, Roger. We'll pick that up in the chat bit at the end. Good work. We don't know what those sockets are for. We've never seen a picture with anything plugged into them, and they've gone to quite a lot of effort to trail them around that enormous wall. They're way off the floor, so I have no idea, but there they are. I hope that all of these comments are also captured in the recorded version, because I can go back over some of these and have a look. So that's the ops room, and that allows you to see the scale of the place. We're quite rare survivor at Wartling, because ours wasn't, they didn't do anything with it afterwards. I mean, a lot of the other sites have been floored over because this is a vast space. Obviously, it's a lot of working space. And if the bunker was put to a later use for any reason, they were often covered over. But we are lucky in that we still have the Mark I configuration. They're sockets, Peter, each of them, they're sockets, and I think they're round pin, but full voltage, not the little 5 amp things. Yeah, so we're quite lucky to have this space because it's quite rare. However, time moves on, and there's another new, they are sockets, Dan. There's another new ops room being created by Grant again up in Scotland, so he's going back to it. And this is the view from Fighter Marshal's office, which is in the corner and has a small window overlooking. This is, we have the last rotor configuration tote, as well as having the last ops room like this, although ours doesn't look like this now, as you probably know. The tote was updated from behind, largely manual, some reverse writing on glass panels and some fixed markers apparently. When I say it doesn't look like this, obviously it was full of water for a long time, and that deposited a thick layer of rust all over the floor. And we've got one particularly obsessive volunteer who spent a very long time cleaning this floor to see if it had anything on it. And he found a white circle painted under the circular table closest to us in the image. So we know exactly where it was. And there are cable channels in the floor for something, but you know, I think this photograph is most interesting for seeing the sheer number of people that are required for doing this. And similar when you look at the pictures in the control cabins, the intercept cabins, there's a lot of people working here just to keep track of numerous traces at the same time. But overall, it's clearly an evolution of the World War II filter room approach. You know, it hasn't really moved on very much, but boy, is that going to change. So here is a rather poor copy of the overall configuration of a Mark I rotor. You can see the big operations room is top right of the main block of the building there, so that gives you a general sense. And then there's trainers, that's all still intact. And then the bit beyond that was repurposed. So this is the config under rotor 1, but things were about to drastically change. Most rotor plan bunkers became operational in the mid-50s, but within just a few years, the increased threat from Soviet nuclear weapons, which were ever more capable. High altitude supersonic bombers were on their way, and they already had a very fast one. And rapid development of the radar tech itself was pulling the rug on the rotor plan. Oh, is everyone else still plugged in for sound? Just give me a couple of yeses and I'll continue. Hayley, are you back? No? Okay, well, I'm going to press on, try rejoining perhaps. So all of these things had moved on, and the system, which was originally devised to counter 350 mile an hour piston engine bombers, just couldn't cope. So as aircraft speeds increased, every second saved in warning and control was vital, because it meant that the baddie was further away when you started flying out towards them. And it was quickly apparent that the additional step of detecting at the center, at the radar sites, and then communicating with the fighter command through the sector operation control was just a needed step. It was manifestly too slow. So they moved to scrambling directly from radar stations and talking directly to the aircraft themselves. So rotor was dead, and the system of master radar stations, which more or less persists to this day, was conceived in a much reduced role, of course. Yeah, I think sound does trip out on any platform you use for this. Still, at least I'm talking. That looked dodgy at the beginning of this. So this, Mick, you probably know this one as well. I know you've done plenty of Soviet fighter fields. In fact, you've done one with me. But this is a 1954 frontal aviation Tupolev Tu-16. So note the date, 54. This is exactly around the time where we were building this to keep back 350 mile an hour planes. This is a Badger A. It's jet powered. It can do about 650 miles an hour. Is it a Bison? I thought that was a Badger, actually. Oh, I could be wrong. Stand to be corrected always. And from 1956, these things carried standoff missiles. So we had to get that detection in as quickly as possible. And you can also see from the sort of fighters we were building in this period. Of course, we had the Lightning on the drawing board and all sorts of things to come, because we needed that speed to get out to them. This thing can deliver sunshine quick sharp, but it just underlines what we had. So the other big change in the rotor system was the radar itself. So some of you will recognize this as the mighty Amy's Type 80. This killed off most of the network of bunkers. You just didn't need them. This was the main tool of the new master radar stations. It's an Air Ministry experimental station Type 80 Mark III search radar. It was built by Decca. I think this is the one that was codenamed Green Garlic. Introduced in 56, and it was installed at Wartling in 56-57. It replaced the Type 7, which, as we said earlier, was kept on. It was developed in the early 1950s from an experimental design which basically bolted two Type 14s together, I understand. They're very large things. I mean, you can tell from the size of the modulator building, which still stands underneath it and is the bit sticking up to the left of it. The radar itself all sits on a big steel spider that sits over the top of the modulator building, but the modulator building itself is quite substantial. So this, compared to a Type 7, is a complete revolution in what you can see. This thing can see 320 nautical miles compared to the 90 odd of the Type 7. The Type 7, I understand, also had worse resolution in identifying what the target was. So this goes around 4 times a minute. Can see 320 nautical miles, and in one fell swoop, half or more than half of the bunkers became completely redundant. The sector operation controls closed. the Chells and the chain home extra low and the centimetric early warning closed down, many of them becoming our beloved RSGs and finding other roles. Up at Bordsey they became a Zeppelin Bloodhound site, for instance, but they found other uses, but mainly in service of government still. Oh, we've got a Plane Geek conversation going off in the sidebar. Right. So our near neighbours, the Centimetric Early Warning Station down at Beachy Head, which is a single-storey bunker, which we are endeavouring to try and reopen if we can ever get past the lumpen bureaucracy of the country park down there. The council's on board, but the country park moves at the speed of a I can't think of an adequate simile, in fact. So Beachy Head and Fairlight, which was a Chell, they shut down because this can do all three. And if they couldn't find a new use, they were put on care and maintenance, and care and maintenance largely meant lock and walk away, as far as I can tell from the state of what we know the state of the majority of the bunkers which are left is. Right, so this is the new world we're looking at now. This is the pit of the master radar station. The working configuration. I'll talk through how this works. I love this picture just because it's so rare, and it shows the working conditions. You can see these in a few places, but we were at one point the only one left in the world. So in one fell swoop, the staffing at Wartling got cut to a complement of around 50, I think. And aside from the technical and welfare spaces, most of the operational areas, including the massive op rooms and the cabins, were abandoned and used for storage or nothing, as far as we can tell. They weren't significantly reworked, which is good for us, but everything shifted down to one end of the bunker into essentially 2 rooms where all of the information was put up in front of the controllers, who were there sitting on the edge of the pit, and they can talk directly to aircraft. So what we see in front of us is the photographic display unit. This is a Kelvin Hughes type indicator. I think that's the right title. A Kelvin Hughes photographic projector. So this could record the radar image on a 35mm film, develop, fix and dry it, and then project it up onto the plotting table in the control room in the floor above. The display of the image was about a minute behind real time. So it was pretty good, but it got updated every 15 seconds. So you'd be in the vicinity of a target. The PPI image, so the same sort of console that we saw at the beginning, that has a high intensity cathode ray tube, and that was projected onto the film through a focusing lens. A really clever little system. I mean, incredibly temperamental, I would imagine. It sounds hellishly complicated and probably broke down all the time. As we got some people who work there here, maybe you could tell us. So all of the paraphernalia for running this would have been on the floor below, and I'm wondering where my picture in this presentation. Oh, it's the next one. That's fortuitous. So that's what it looks like now. So to the untrained eye among you, you might think that this is totaled, but we think this is a gem and needs to be saved because it's the last original one. We thought in 2005 when we got in here, it was the only one left. So it was terribly important to keep it. You'll notice the thick ground glass covering over the projector hole was too tempting for the vandals, and that went very early. The site was subject to vandalism from the off, really. The RAF went away in '76. that's when they put it onto care and maintenance, and at that point it had sat dormant for several years, but at least it was looked after. And the vandals and the metal thieves moved in very soon afterwards, and but they weren't the biggest vandals. The biggest vandals were by far the RAF, who left a whacking hole in the top of the structure that filled it with huge amounts of water. So this is how it looked when I first visited the bunker. So as I said, this was a unique survivor in 2005, but then Halton came on stream. So this is the museum site, which was looked after by the RAF much later in its life than any other station that's not still operational, I think. And it was managed by a trust, and is now, you can go and visit it. It's towards Spurn Head near Hull on that little peninsula there. And they lifted a floor, and lo and behold, they found a complete Kelvin Hughes type indicator. This was discovered in 2011. So we stopped being quite so unique. It's lovely to see that this thing is still there. We've recently had to do quite a lot of work just to save this wreckage that I showed you a minute ago, because it's still an original artifact in situ. And I know several of you also explore old mines, and in our community, something can be pretty far gone before we'll consider it worthy of the bin. We have a conservation standard at the bunker where if you can recognise what something is, it's an artifact. We keep anything which is identifiable. You know, we throw away smashed plaster and anything like that. But if you can identify what a thing is, we keep that, and we just sort of clean to that standard. So this is a real survivor for us. Right, so I'll show you the configuration of the Mark II, if you like, the Mark II rotor. How are we doing for time? Wow, that's nearly an hour. Goodness. Okay, so this is it, and you can see that the new operations room is top left, and that's the bit that works. And downstairs, you've got the KH and gallery. That area was the working gubbins of what's upstairs. It doesn't appear that it went into radar office, but there we are. Thanks, Ed. Okay, so that's the sort of history bit, if you like. Just to complete that, 64 was the last time. So there were some changes in the radar program after the MRS, but basically radar got far more reliable, far more long-seeing, and most importantly, ICBMs came along, so nobody's going to be flying bombers to you to drop things on you when they can deliver them to your doorstep at about Mach 9. So the whole thing went away, and now the major role of radar in warfare is to identify aircraft that might be carrying scrambling transmitters, because they have to be much, much weaker if you can get them. They can be much weaker if you can get them closer to the target radar. So that's largely all done at Bulmer now in an R3, but they don't have radar heads there. It's the same kind of bunker on the northeastern coast near Alnwick, but that's used as the RAF and NAT's joint, I think it's an air situation room or something like that, but they only use a small part of the bunker as well. So now I'm going to go on and look at what happened when we did the big pump. So a lot of you would have been in Sub Brit at that time, and I'm going to canter through these a little bit because I've been going on quite a lot. So in 2004, Nick, what's he called, Catford, who you'll see in a minute, and what's he called, Robin, yeah, can't remember his name, sorry, approached me and said, we've got sort of permission to pump this out. Can you help us? And I'm a project manager by trade, and doesn't give me any particular qualification to do this. But anyway, I said, yeah, I'll get involved. So I went down to meet the farmer. Lovely chap, lovely family. They've been really good to us. Robin Ware? No, it wasn't Robin Ware. No. He's called Robin, but his real name's Robert, I think, or Bob. Anyway, yeah, lovely family. They've been great to us the whole time we've been there. They're really interested in the bunker and look after it. So the picture on your screen is not in 2004. That's in 1987. And in 2004, yeah, it was touching the light fittings, which is a real shame because we didn't get to keep any of that lovely 1950s green paint, which would have been a fillip for us, I think. So we set up a project for Sub Brit members on a subscription basis, the first time we'd ever tried anything like this. And I said, give me a tenner and I'll get all the stuff together and arrange it, get the pumps, empty it out. And for your tenner, you'll be one of the first people to set foot in the bunker in a very long time, probably since about 1986, when the current owner hardened up the security on it by having a very large steel door welded on. I think it had been closed for most of that period, apart from occasional visits. I think some of our volunteers got in during those years. It was stage pumping over 2 weeks in August of 2004. This is what the ops room looked like. I remember finding that quite daunting at the time because these are big structures. That's a lot of water down there. Again, this is 86. So the water was significantly higher than this. I think you'll see a tide line later on in some later photographs. 2004, it says it was above the tote gallery. That doesn't mean over the roof of the tote, the gallery layer, the floor. And this is in a right state now, which won't surprise you really. That's the main stairwell in 96. So you can see how far that's gone in the 10 years, and that's very close to the level. And here's Nick Catford in younger form. We hired all of the dewatering equipment from a civil engineering supply business in Haywards Heath, and it come directly off site. And I've worked on building sites my whole career, and I know they abuse the gear, but my goodness, this stuff was in a state. What Nick's doing there is he's hammering one of the rubber pipes they'd given us with a hammer to break up the concrete which is lining it. So it didn't really work as a pipe. So we wrangled around with that and got rid of the hole and got things flowing, and then it worked. This is a swirl tank. We had to do swirl tank between levels because you couldn't get the pumps to operate at anything like a reasonable performance with the amount of head they have to overcome. So you're going up about, I think from the bottom of the bunker, it's close to 60 foot, 60, 70 foot. And Hillary, I'll use whatever SI units I want. Yeah, so we just had to make sure that they didn't run dry because, of course, this was not maintained. We locked it up, went down once every 2 or 3 days. It was me and 2 other volunteers who were doing that. And here's my boy Joe by the pipe, which at this time is pushing out very little. But the water was remarkably clean. We had it tested by the, was it Natural England, or I think it might have been Southern Water, actually. No, very helpful. Dynarod said, yeah, it'll cost you $2,000, mate. They did it for nothing. And in return for a visit, which was super. And much pumping later, we got about 20 million litres out, which is a lot of water. And this, it wasn't dry in the ops room. We couldn't get it down in time. But this was very exciting, and you can see the tide line on the wall. That's where it finished up. So the ops room, which is actually lower than this level because you're still standing on top of the cable management system in the corridors, is still about 1.5 meters lower than this still. So still a bit of space to go. And there's the ops room. You can see the water level is still there. Time has really taken its toll on this. It looks nothing like that today. We've cleaned it up. The question, where was the water pumped to? We got a permission, we got a license to pump it out onto the Pevensey levels. Oh, I see, that's just been done. 30 minutes left. Okay, fine, I'll gun through these. this shows the lighting system. Sadly, what we haven't got is a picture of the ballasts that run these things, because each one weighs, I think, 10, is it? No, each one's about 5 kilos, and that's per tube. So if you think of the little thing that you screw into the side of your fluorescent fittings, in the 50s, they were nothing like that. And we had them cut through the wall that you can see in front of us there. They fell off the ceiling, they're mounted on wood, and the cable between them, which is metal clad, cut a slot down that, which we've since had to, how we did. Yeah, I did all those sums, Dan. Right, just checking if I've got any notes on any of these. Right, that's the radar office. That's the plant room once we'd emptied it out, and there's still an awful lot of debris around. This was immediately after pumping. That's all gone now. There's that notice board which I mentioned earlier. This is the one on the opposite end of the building to the version you saw, or that's got a reversed image, I don't know, but it's a nice little survivor. And you can see the cladding on the walls, everything is just lost, but we step through it as carefully as we can. This is the mess, which is where we all sit and have our lunch, been moodily lit by someone. I don't know whether that was intentional or not. There's an interesting point. The board to the left that's leaning against the wall, you see that black stuff on it. That is a mould, a new mould. So when we first took the water out, we got dry rot everywhere, the classic white fluffy stuff. This has moved in since we dropped the relative humidity to about 96%, which is where it usually sits, 96, 95%. And this stuff will eat anything, sadly. It's going pretty slowly, but give it enough time, it'll eat the whole place. Right, that is, what is that? That's the entrance corridor. Yeah, that's all tidied up. So there's no longer any link to the entrance bungalow. That was severed by a wall years ago, because that's now a private house which is owned by our neighbour, who we have to sort of be careful about working around. So how did all that water get in there? Very simple story. RAF didn't really care. They just wanted to get rid of their, that's a good idea, Dan. I'll write that down. We do work with the National Trust's mycologist. Is it mycologist? Anyway, a fungus guy. And he gives us some advice sometimes. So this is why it was full of water. So what they did was they knocked down the cable shaft, top structure, threw it down the hole, rough poured very, very hard concrete. This stuff is really hard to break up. And then they smoothed it over with some soil, and that's it. And this was, I did a calc earlier on. It's about 70,000 litres a year was coming in. I think that's right. Over the 28 years from 76. So we had to do something about that. So we dug down from the top. I think our digger drivers, we had two, Dave Hayes and lovely Dom Jackson, who's sadly no longer with us. We dug down to the top. We found the cable shaft straight away. Very simple piece of surveying, but we were pleased when we found it. We broke a hole because we wanted some through airflow. Pretty nasty down there, and dust just wouldn't go away. So we built a snorkel structure, which is still on the surface now. We may be redigging this in the next few years if we can get permission so to do. There's me next to the hole, because I was the first person to do the through trip, go in one entrance and come out the other, and this was only possible for a day because we closed it up very quickly because we're quite wary about the risk to both the farmers' cows, which use this field, and anyone falling in it, dogs, etc. So there we go. And there's our snorkel structure. Who have we got there? That's Tim Robinson and Chris Howells, I think, as well as David. That's our snorkel, and we use one of those pipes to bring utilities downstairs and for our pipes to get out, and the other one is an air. We also realigned the slab on the damp air exhaust. So this is above, this is part of the air conditioning system, and this has just been pushed over. So we repaired the slab and we pushed it back into position. That used to be the source of a few thousand litres. We got rid of that. And we got in the holes. Of course, it's a radar station, so it's absolutely covered in holes to get the wires out onto the fields. So we dug down in wherever they came out. We found that sealing them from the inside just didn't work, and we sealed them with hydraulic grout and then tar, and then covered them over. One of the buggers has started leaking again recently, but it's still pretty good. Now, this was the final solution. Sorry, not final solution. That's the destruction of European Jewry. This was the last thing that we tried to stop the water. What we discovered was we built a dam in front of that very ugly repair you saw, and we built another dam in front of that, and we tried pumping the water out of that to outside to keep it high. But what we discovered, that as soon as water gets into the bunker anywhere, it gets into a brick linings, what do you call it, cement course, mortar course, and it will hydraulic to anywhere in the bunker. It just goes. So we determined that the only way to do it was reduce the head at the top dam as much as possible, down to about 5-6 inches, pipe it into these IBCs, which we installed, put automatic pumping in there, which required us to have power. And as long as it doesn't hit the floor, we can get it out. And we're now down to a few thousand litres a year. We tend to suffer most when the rainfall has been very unusually high. This is a flange onto the original sewage drainage system, which we used to exhaust water from the bunker. It definitely wouldn't, Hillary. This stuff's pretty aggressive, and also needs a solution. That's the plant room with the lowest water level we'd ever seen. And look at that, a dusty floor for the first time in, well, as long as any of us can remember. So yeah, that's your flange, Richard. I remember you up on the ladder, cable ties in hand. Yeah, so dusty floor, which is lovely to see. We did have a secondary flood event, which got rid of that pretty quickly, but we're now drying out again. And then other jobs, that was supporting the staircase when we worked out that it was going to fall on our heads or we were going to fall off it. Clean up generally. You can see the tote and the tide line. Sadly, the right hand end of the tote there is beginning to collapse now. It's just started going. You can see it's sagging there, but it's started going, so we will be losing it pretty quickly. So we stop people going over there. There are now tours through English Heritage which give us a modest income each year. Obviously not at the moment, but there you go. And we don't let people trundle around wherever they want. It's obviously it's a potential death trap. There you can see some of the replacement flooring which we put in with a grant from Sub Brit quite a long time ago now, and that's Bob and Nick sorting out the bacon sangers, because you've got to get your priorities right. Nowadays it tends to be Howard's job, I think, but anyway, it's nice to have some community time while we're down there, because we are after all a group of friends who work on it. There's Nigel fixing up the blockhouse. You know, I told you at the beginning that it was a right state. That's it now. And you also notice top left in the first picture, that's vandals used to get in the corner of the grill just above the door, and there was an ugly steel plate put over it. So Dave Hayes, who is an extraordinary fabricator, and you'll see some more of his handiwork later, made up exact copies of the fins, welded them in, and then sprayed them with stuff that makes them look the same. So that's all lovely. That's Ben making our doors open. That's the main gas door to the bunker. On the emergency exit end, that's him making the bolts work. This is us laying in power, and this was what allowed us to get the bunker dry in the end. This is about 150 meters of 16mm armor SWA cable, which we installed to give us a reliable supply, and we got some great help with all the electrics. Among our volunteers, we can do anything. Honestly, I'm amazed by these people. I don't do anything really. I wander around and dust things, but the people that we've got involved in the project can drive machines, can design things, can fabricate anything we want out of pretty much any material, and come to the rescue whatever we want. Telecoms, plumbing, electrics, whatever. They're an amazing group of people. There's, looks like Richard. Yeah, there's Richard making a staircase. Now this is made out of scaff boards, which lasted approximately 3 months, 6 months before the fungus ate them. But that was to create safe access to the ops room, because the previous way was to hop over bits of shelving. That's the new staircase completed. That's David's repair to the grill. I don't know why I've included this. No. Recent work. So I put together a little montage. I had this beautifully designed in PowerPoint, but it's all been changed by putting it up on this platform. The staircase was a death trap. So with the funding from Sub Brit, we replaced it a few years ago. If you have any questions, I'm going to just get a few minutes at the end, I think. So we cut out the old staircase. David fabricated us a new one. We managed to get hold of a load of stair treads to go into that. And that's it all being welded and fixed together. I didn't give you much of a look at that second one. There's Nigel fixing on the made steel structure, but that thing's going to last for another 100 years and will provide safe access for people to come and visit it, which you're all welcome to do on one of our work days. This was the effort to save the Kelvin Hughes indicator. So that's Ed and David up a ladder, and Nigel and Ben, by the look of it, fixing a unistrut cage underneath it to keep it off the floor. So that's all pretty good. Oh, and this is we've got a fantastic health and safety record. We only ever had 2 accidents. One of them didn't hurt anyone. That's the one on the left with me halfway up a ladder. I was trying to stop that light going anywhere, and it readjusted itself very quickly by tearing through the wall. And then the second one, this dent in the flooring, that's where I warned everyone to mind the holes in the floor that Nick had lifted to do some essential works, and then promptly walked straight into one of them, injuring my leg. Yeah, I can't remember why I put that on. Oh, this is more on the staircase. This is the fabrication works on the staircase. These are little bridges which we put in. The English heritage people, they get their members to pay quite a lot of money to come and visit this, and they get an excellent talk by this guy who takes them around. He's a really good researcher, knows his stuff, and can speak well. We built these little bridges because they're average members. You know, the first visit terrified us because some of these people couldn't walk downstairs comfortably. So we put these in. They're completely removable, but they're much safer than anything else. And this is what a lot of us do with our time there. We convert it from a completely destroyed space into a slightly less destroyed space, sorting everything we find with fingertip searches and cleaning it all up. And that's the original badge that Adrian Kidwell had made up for us, and that sits in our mess for when we have cups of tea. We can look at it. There's an identical one in the Lamb Inn, the excellent Lamb Inn at Wartling. So if you come down and visit us, definitely go there for a pint once this is all over. And that's the original building designation, which was handed to me on a visit to Hampton by Eek. I should really have his name on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember who it was. Maybe Mark Riveron. Said, oh, I took these out for safekeeping in the 80s, and it was like amazing. We got these and some other signage, and we've collected quite a few artifacts since. And that's everything that I've got to say. I hope that wasn't too much of an onslaught, and I hope you learned something, or at least had an hour of your lockdown boredom alleviated a little bit. If you've got any questions, I'll be happy to take them. I don't think Tony said anything at the outset of this, but this is going to be one of a series of talks. You'll be very pleased to hear that they're not all by me. There will be various subjects concerning all the lovely underground things that we can't currently get into. So stay tuned to your Sub Brit channel, or if you follow us on the Wartling ZUN page, anything, any channel, they'll be announced there. Tony will put out fair warning. I think Tim Welburn is doing one on the tunnels of Gibraltar, which he's visited for longer than anyone really should. There we go. I see there's a question, do we have any restoration ambitions? We've got a very clear charter, actually. Stephen, it was operational for much less than that. It was 55 to 64 overall. But in the latter stages of that, real wind down, not much after the late 50s. The conservation ambition for this is really just to make it safe and accessible, conserve whatever we've got left, and make sure that it remains available. We could, of course, lose access to the site at any time if it's sold or whatever, but we've got an excellent relationship with the landowners, and I'm sure that we would be introduced to the new landowners. And thankfully, there are also a lot of the volunteers are much younger than me. So hopefully it will be looked after for a very long time. And thanks to Sub Brit's funding, we've been able to make it, huge advances on the structure. It used to be tiptoe around among all the junk, and now it's genuinely a good place to visit, very easy. You don't need anything. So were they trying to hide the sites, making the bungalows look like real residents, even though it was on a radar site? I don't know, really. I've always been a bit ambivalent about this, because trying to hide anything in close proximity to a Type 80 or 84 radar is a bit pointless. If you've seen the one at Neatishead, especially when they're revolving at 4 times a minute, and they're nearly 90 feet long. So, I think that any hint that they are secret sites is vestigial at best. But yeah, so I don't think so. I'm seeing if I can scroll up the chat. I think I missed one. No. How many volunteers are involved? There's a core group of us who turn up to everything, and that's actually quite large, and our numbers in recent years have got bigger, which is something of a problem because we're running out of things to do. But I'd say the long list is probably 20, 30 people. The short list is about 10, 12 of us who you can rely on to turn up with all the stuff, and they do work off-site as well. We have talked about doing a 360 degree virtual walkthrough in the past. There are several walkthrough videos on YouTube if you want to have a general look. But the 3D thing, I probably wouldn't bother with, to be honest. They're a lot of work. If anyone's seen the amazing piece of work that Hannes Hensel did on Object 5001 in East Germany, wonderful, but the man's a dangerous obsessive. I'm not going to get involved in that sort of stuff. Martin, next major piece of work. We are wondering about that. I need to be able to scroll up this thing. It's going too fast. We haven't really got a major piece of work in mind. We're going to fit telemetry on the pumps because we had a pump failure 2 years ago that caused about 10,000 litres to come in. That's the only thing I've really got on. And that doesn't use a lot of people or a lot of grunt. You know, most of our projects have been heavy engineering to date, and we're not doing that. The access arrangements are, if you're in Sub Brit, get to know, if you know any of us. So, you know, it's a small community. I'm easy to get hold of. You can get hold of me through Sub Brit. You can find out when we've got open days. You can come through EH. When you come along for a visit, all we ask is a donation of 10 or 20 quid to go to the contribution of the fund. Oh, Big Dig 2, that's a very good point. It wasn't given to me by James Fox at Hampton. No, it wasn't. No, he was not involved. Yeah, he's mentioned the Big Dig 2. So what we might do, we've got the money and we've got the resources and the willpower. We may put in a secondary access over the snorkel and turn that into a small building instead. The limitation really is the hassle that we would cause to our neighbours, and I think it might be necessary to use the quietest technology we can, like chemical grouts, to burst the structure open, so that we can do it as quietly as possible. Because I think if we did it with a pecker on a 360 machine, I think we would lose permission to do anything. Yeah, underlining the point that Ed's making, you're welcome to come along and have a look. Do not go onto the farm to have a look on you can't get into anything. I'm happy to facilitate visits at any time. Well, not any time, when I'm there. We're very lucky that we don't get much negative attention from the urbex community, and I think that's because it's known that we're accessible, and we know quite a lot of people in the urbex community ourselves, of course. I don't know that, Adrian, your question. So don't go down and just have a look on the off chance. There's nothing to see and you'll just annoy the farmer. But if you get hold of us, we can get you in there, or go through EH. And Mark Selwood, it is really excellent. You know, he charges quite a lot, but everyone I know who's been on his tours have said that sounds that sounds really good. Or it was very enjoyable. How many others in the audience actually worked at Wartling? So we know Stackers, who's a radar tech. We know Howard's your man for this in the chat. Howard Ratcliffe, his mum and dad worked there, and he's met several former people. I think on the Facebook group we'll also have a few people which chime in from time to time, but of course it's an aging population. It's this sort of thing that needs oral history to be collected now. Yeah, John Sherrington's another one who works there. Yeah. Right, so we are coming up to the end of our session. I don't know if anyone has any final things to say. I think otherwise I will bid you goodbye, and I hope you're all looking after you and yours, and hopefully we'll all be able to go underground very, very soon.